Aiden, nice to see you again on this beautiful day. And this time with a quote by Hermann Hesse, where he writes, "So that the possible emerges, the impossible must be tried again and again." Hayden, where do you try the impossible again and again and see that possibilities emerge which you haven't thought would be possible?
It is good to be back with you, my friend. The first thing that comes to mind, perhaps just due to what I put a lot of my attention on these days, is the nature of finding product market fit in entrepreneurship. When you first set out to start a business, you kind of have a hypothesis about what the world wants and what problem people would be grateful for you to solve and compelled if you can solve it. That this would be an actually really good solution to combine the existing resources that are available to deliver to what the universe, deliver to the universe what it needs and what it's willing to pay for. And in that, in my experience, you do have to hold it kind of as a hypothesis, and you try this thing and you try to connect with this group of people with this pitch or this value proposition, and then you find that this is impossible, that this is not a fit, or the resources that you have at your disposal can't actually deliver the solution that would be needed, et cetera, until you finally find the fit, until you finally find what works through this trial and error of messaging and experimentation. The other dimension that this applies, though, in my view, is just in the nature of our journey and trying to figure out our own way in this world, trying to figure out what works and what is true in the empirical sense of what, or the pragmatic sense of what stacks up to actually deliver the goods to solve the problems that we run into in our regular life or in the things that are the most important to us energetically or spiritually or personally or in whatever ends that we may have in this world. And in doing so, what we find is that we have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of suggestions. There's a lot of things that people will mention to us are important for us to do for this and that reason to attain XYZ results. And in our own life, we have to actually push those up against reality and see what sticks, what doesn't, what works, what falls short. And in that, in the experimentation, in the trying of many things, we find that sometimes this is a square peg in a round hole. And sometimes this thing just doesn't work. And then this thing fits a little bit and then it gets blocked over here. And then this thing gets totally blocked and it can't even make its way toward this problem for XYZ reason. Or this thing falls short because it gets its legs swept out from under him over here. And in this trying, in this doing, in this seeing, in this empiricism of actually practically speaking, what is the results of whatever is done here? We see that, okay, this thing is impossible, or this problem does not actually solve this solution, and yet this thing does. And then we can start to get a sense of what does fit and why. What is the solution problem fit that emerges? And I think that it is really by our many failures, or at least maybe failures isn't the right word, the many attempts that do not succeed at the original objective, that we can start to get a feel for those rare fits where really this thing does click into place and it does integrate and it does help and it does accomplish the mission and deliver the goods, and it is worth it, and it's worthwhile, and we're glad to have done it. How do you think about this impossible finding the possible? I think that in my own experience, it can be frustrating to bump my face up against a wall of impossibility. What is the available reframe when we do run into what proves to be impossible, what we hoped for that doesn't connect? And how can we recognize that this is perhaps the soil in which the possible can actually begin to emerge?
Well, what I think is to find what is possible, you have to try. And you have to connect whatever your hypothesis is, like you said, with the real world so that you can, through the grind, through the friction that when you expose your idea to the real world, you find a fit much better, or you find where it clicks much better. For me, the analogy strikes as well where you compare optimists with pessimists. And the same way you can say pessimists say more often that this is impossible. This is not possible. Then they won't look out for possibilities which in fact could demonstrate that this is possible. And they stop trying. When you believe something is not possible, you won't reach out for it. But when you believe that there's a possibility, then you will reach out and take chances with knowing that there's likely failure in front of you. But through the act of reaching out, you can steer the outreach even better so that you can navigate the biggest attractors, the biggest spots of failure. And through the mining of the space of possibilities, you will find with higher likelihood a thing which fits. So optimists believe that some things is possible. Everything is possible, in fact, that is not prohibited by the laws of physics. And when a thing is not prohibited by the laws of physics, because these are the only laws which are not conventions, then there is a possibility that it works. Maybe only in a very narrow sweet spot of combinations of very complex interactions. But to find these, you have to go out and let the rocket fly, let the rocket explode, and learn from the failures so that you shape your experiments in a way that you can play the game again. And if you can play the game again, you can feed back the insights from your failures, which means you will act with your next experiment in a much more sensible manner, which means you will be more likely not to fail because of the previous reason you failed, but maybe for another reason. That is not important because you learned. And if you placed your bet in a way that there's a learning loop and that you can play the game again, then it means you have learned, you reached out into the realm of possibilities. So what needs to be true for our creativity so that we design a game where we can iterate ad infinitum? How do you experience how your creativity applies to finding what is possible?
I would say one constraint that we must leave aside is we must not constrain ourselves to only trying what we know will work. And we cannot be so attached to the outcome of a project before we begin it that we're unwilling to take the risk of running into a wall of impossibility. I can see, for example, in college, many people will push you toward going for the most secure job that everybody around you is getting and that you know you can get and that you know that it will be there next year and the year after that and the year after that or whatever. And this bias for a proven path with no risk, this can cut off the possibility of new experiments, many of which will prove to fail, many of which will prove to be impossible. But that opening up to failing many, many times on the way to succeeding, this is what does open up the possibility of true creativity, of true creation of something that is new and good in a way that the broad and well-trodden path is often incapable of being good, in my experience. I think of Thomas Edison, who tried like, I don't know, like a million different things to make the light bulb work and finally found this one filament substrate where the things actually clicked into place. And it was through this many paths of impossibilities that he found this final solution that ended up accomplishing the mission. And so not filtering by what we need the result to be in advance, but yet opening ourselves to following. I think this is a key, and it does relate to creativity. The artist that already has a destination in mind is not being a true artist. They're being perhaps an artisan at best and walking to sort of put things together rather than truly create and let the source manifest whatever emerges. And this concept of creativity in realms and places does require this openness to wherever creativity leads. I had a friend in high school who was just a brilliantly creative guitarist, and he would just riff. He had no idea what he was going to play next, but it just flowed and emerged out of him. And because he didn't have a sheet of music that he was following and a destination in mind, he was able to create some of the most beautiful music that where he had no idea where it was coming from or what was going to come next, or if it was even had no control over what the sound would be and where the melody would go. This is the jazz of life. I think this applies to our path as well, and it requires this willingness to risk playing a bad tune or willingness to risk the discord and the reset and the fresh start. And in fact, we can do much more with 10 failures and one creative streak than we can with just a mundane path of non-failure all throughout, oftentimes in my experience. And what emerges in terms of possibilities is not merely striking a lucky chord. It also is growing our capacity to find those connections, to find what truly fits, to recognize what truly fits. There is this skill of beginning to recognize the shape and the feel and the sense of the possible within the field of impossible, or to, as you say, mine the field of possibilities. I think this is a core element where I see many people who are in middle to late stages of succeeding at things, and now they can spot opportunities. They know a good thing when they see one. They recognize what will work with an intuitive sense because they've mined this field, and they've seen and felt what fit versus non-fit, works versus doesn't work. Even for new things, there's an intuition that we can accumulate over time, I believe. And for me, an example would be in, well, I guess there's many. Marketing is where this emerges most vividly for me. I had to fail at so many different marketing experiments and succeed at just a few before I gained a sense of what is worthwhile, what is not, what works, what doesn't, where things are getting higher signal versus not, how to spot the signal within the noise or the leading indicators, or run good experiments to front load the failure inexpensively rather than have it be long and drawn out after much resources before realizing that something is a dead end. And so the art of fleshing out possibility versus impossibility becomes its own mini meta skill, I think. What do you think about this in perhaps our personal life? What do you think about this in our spiritual life? Where else does this apply? I think it's easy for me to see where it applies in business and entrepreneurship. I'm curious of what razors or mental models might be helpful for us in our personal side of things.
I think the personal side of things is to opt for optionality, meaning
Okay.
even if you're tired, go to the party at least for an hour. Even if you're tired, get out of bed and go to the conference where like-minded people will be found. And so this is a razor which, when I apply it, it's always proving to be fruitful in ways that I did not think were possible. Leaving alone yesterday, I was tired, got out of bed, went to a talk about AI and retrieval, augmented generation, and so on, because it was matching my interests in building a company brain. So I met not only great people, I also got inspired to reach for possibilities which I haven't thought were in the mix yet, because some guy showed me an application he created within a few days, which is really awesome. And then on top of that, I walked through the town and met a guy which is deeply tied to a place where I work with. And we had a good conversation, some ideas flowed, and I went back home and worked on these ideas. So it was just by chance, just because of me exposing myself to the real world, through to the possibilities of meeting people, to the optionality of gaining more than I could ever lose, that I gained more ideas and worked on higher leverage ideas than I would just if I just would have sitting at home in front of the computer and looked at the lake. Opt in for optionality is a razor where we can continue our evolution in making what we previously thought would be impossible much more possible, because we invite chance into the mix. It's then not a straight line, but we can wiggle and dance around in the stream of life, because we meet other people, we confront with other ideas. Maybe ideas will bubble up just through random combinations of things which emerge in front of our view. So this is the razor. What do you think about it, Peyton? What is your razor?
Yeah, two things come to mind. One for the the personal side of things is the willingness to be rejected or the willingness to look stupid is upstream of our capacity to practice this in our own life. If we're so fixated on being dignified at all times and looking cool in every room that we stand in and not putting our foot in our mouth or not looking like not letting getting left hanging, so to speak, then our guardedness will prevent us and cut us off from extending that arm out into the universe to open up to all of these possibilities and impossibilities that can arise in our path. It will cut us off from synchronicity if we are afraid to extend a kindness or a joke to a total stranger that can then lead to this interaction or whatever. And in all these things, whether in our personal life or our spiritual life or in business or whatever, the dynamic that makes us so powerful or so useful to open ourselves up to all of the impossibilities in order that we can flesh through and actually see what possibilities do rise to the surface out of this mine of impossibilities is that the difference of magnitude of running into a wall of what doesn't work versus finding a connection that actually is fulfilled and delivers the goods and is possible where it wasn't possible before. There can be this huge asymmetry of the magnitude of these things. It could be that if you write a book and you're trying to get published, you write 100 letters to publishers and you get rejected 99 times. But the one that publishes you is actually all that you need to make the whole 100 worthwhile. And this is a common old school example. It could be that you talk to 100 people and 60 of them spit in your face and 30 of them are a waste of time. And yet 10 of them actually become great connections that last for years and years and years. Meanwhile, the 60 that spat in your face lasted 2 months. And there's this crazy asymmetry there. It could be that you try to find product market fit for a business and then you try 50 things that don't work. And it takes you a year to run all of these failed experiments. And you invest X amount of dollars into these experiments that doesn't yield anything that actually works. And then you find one thing that works. And then it is greater in because you can scale it up. Once it fits at a unit level, you can scale it up more and more and more. And it fits, it connects, and you can pour fuel in the fire. And it's worth way more than anything you could have done just doing what was already known for that year when you were running the failed experiments. The world works like this in a lot of ways. Our psychology isn't necessarily evolved for this kind of asymmetry in our environment, but now this is where we find ourselves. And so the ability to open ourselves to failure, rejection, impossibility, etc., and actually leaning into the exploration of impossibility, perhaps retraining our dopamine system to find satisfaction in all of our failed experiments in the world, all of our rejections in the world, etc. This can actually be an unlock that opens up a much more unbounded set of what is possible for us in our path, in our life, whether it's this realm and dimension of our life or this one. We can engage with the universe and live much more fully and have much more exciting and rich experiences if we can actually retrain ourselves in this way, in my opinion. So, with that being said, any intentions in your mind? How might we think of this or embody this or carry this week in a way that will open up new possibilities for us?
Yeah, you reminded me of a thing which I seem to have forgotten, but the retraining of our sense of satisfaction to collecting a rejection from a potential customer, for example.
Yeah.
This is a great reframe so that we can truly mine the field of possibilities because we are thinking, probably we are biased, but we think, oh, this customer won't be interested. This customer won't be interested. Neither this won't be interested. But what if we tried? What if
Yeah.
we just want to collect a rejection, just to really confront with reality, to really be sure of it? Because we may be surprised that, oh, this is, yeah, maybe this is not the right product for our customer, but maybe we'll find a black swan and saying, this is what we didn't know, but we can serve as well. So this is my intention for the week, to reframe myself into finding satisfaction, to find and collect failures and collect rejections so that I really see what's going on from the real feedback, not from my imaginary small me wanting to not expose myself, me wanting not to look stupid. So this is my asymmetric bet that I want to take next week. What about you? What intentions do you have, Peyton?
Yeah, I love the intention to clear our head trash out of the way that can become a blocker and a barrier. I think my intention is to embrace the walls that I run into, the barriers that I encounter, the frustrations along the way. I think in my regular weeks, I have many successes and many failures, and I tend to be frustrated by the things that don't work or where I'm running into a wall of impossibility. And so, and not as much in the sense of interpersonal rejection, but although this sometimes too, but also in the sense of just is something working or not. When something's not working, I notice that sometimes I spend my time in frustration or regret over something in the past or of resistance on some level to whatever impossibility I'm encountering. And it's not really a good use of my energy to consume too much of it with those ways of being, with those reactions, with those loops. And so I think this week my intention is to open myself to what is working, to what is not working, to accept it all unconditionally and to allow what is possible to be possible, allow what is impossible to be impossible, and to trust when I don't know if this is something that is going to be possible or impossible, to just go with the flow of all of these uncertainties with or with more softness, I would say, less of a firm grip on how I want reality to be.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you very much for the conversation. Appreciate you as always. Until next week.
See you next time, my brother. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye.